How are you?
Oh, hey, what's up? By the way, the chat is there's no like chat to write in, so like people cannot basically like answer the like what you're asking. So yeah,
I never looked at the chat anyway.
but yeah, fair enough. But yeah, just like for people having any questions, but who don't necessarily want to go in the call, I think it would be better to create like a chat or something.
Yo, hello.
How's it going?
Doing pretty good because I'm a genius Eastern Orthodox.
Sounds like Jay Dyer.
Isn't that kind of contradictory?
No, it's not because we're chosen by God directly. But anyways, I'm gonna prove it to you. God, you know how God's real? The
I wouldn't
same
necessarily
way,
say so. No.
the same way why scientists and modern physicists believe in dark matter, the same rational reasoning, which they call evidence, that's equipped with God.
And what do you
Same
think?
way.
What do you think that way is?
By measuring rational thought, for example, seeing an effect.
What's the effect of dark
matter?
matter?
An effect has to have a cause.
What's the effect of dark matter?
The effects of dark matter is dark energies.
No, dark energy is
sorry, gravitational
Spot
pull.
on, dude. Spot on.
The gravitational pull is the effect.
Sure. And what is the effect of God?
Yeah. Wait 1 second. I need to put on my speaker. I say it again.
What is the effect of God? What do you think? So dark matter.
The universe. The universe.
No physicist thinks that. So.
That's not the point. You're appealing to authority.
No.
Just because they don't think that it. Just because modern physics don't point to a supreme supernatural being, that does not mean that this cannot exist. Understand?
It just means there's no evidence for it. So it's like saying
in biology, what is evidence?
In biology, like we can say, oh look, there's cell division, and none of the experts in the field think that a sky daddy or a leprechaun does it because there's no evidence of it.
Okay, buddy.
Evidence is that which can differentiate.
So show me your evidence of dark matter.
Dark matter is not an actual thing. It's a label we put for an unknown thing. So dark matter isn't that kind of thing. No, it's not. It's literally not.
No, the substance is unknown.
Well, isn't dark matter usually defined as this sort of, or like something that we label like the extra or additional like gravitational pull around like
that's distinct.
Like
dark matter
galaxies
is whatever is causing the extra gravitational force.
Exactly.
But it's not a thing. It's not like
so
we don't claim to know.
Whoa.
Dark matter isn't an ontology. It's not a thing that exists that we're saying exists. It's an unknown. We're saying we don't know what caused this, so we're going to give it an unknown label. Now, if you're just saying we don't know what caused the universe, and you're going to give it an unknown label like that, that's perfectly fine. You can't call it God anymore. Just call it dark universe.
1 second. Is so dark matter not a thing?
No. It has no properties. There are no properties of dark matter. Dark matter is an unknown thing.
There are properties of dark energy.
No, again, dark energy is the same thing. We put a label. The dark part.
Oh, really?
Means
okay,
unknown.
Watch this.
Dark part means
you're
unknown.
Finished. Why does NASA say there's?
So dark matter and dark energy. The reason we place those labels on things is because we don't know what the cause is. The dark part means unknown. So when we say dark matter or dark energy, that means we don't know what's causing this phenomenon. That's all it means. So if you want to say the same about universe or God, that's perfectly fine. You can say dark universe, but then you can't say it's God. What is up, Tequila?
Hi.
Do you have a question?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Balls.
That's great.
Dark energy has properties.
Dark energy is an unknown thing. We don't know what it is. That's the thing.
Dude, oh my gosh, listen. Yeah, it is an unknown substance.
We
don't know the contextualization of what it exactly
it is.
We're
not saying we know what it is if it's unknown. So if
Yeah, let
you're
me
trying to
answer.
say, God made the universe, that's not like scientists, because scientists say
Oh,
we
I can
don't
answer.
know what caused dark matter or dark energy, and you're
Mm,
saying I
yeah, they
do
do
know
now.
what caused the universe. So you're not like scientists.
Can you give me one NASA? Can you give me one NASA study where it says dark matter doesn't exist?
No one says that. Dark matter is, again, not a thing. Like if I say protons exist.
So it doesn't
Protons,
exist.
no, that's not how words work. You need to learn how words work. Protons are a thing. It has properties. It has an electric charge. It has mass. It has a size. These things are what makes something a proton. If I say something is unknown, we're not saying it has any properties. We don't know what the properties are. That's what dark matter is. It's an unknown. We don't know what the properties are. We know there's something there that causes this phenomenon, and we don't know what it is. That's what dark means in physics. Dark, unknown. So if you want to say you don't know what caused the origin of the universe, that's perfectly fine. Then you would be like a scientist. If you want to say God caused the universe, then you're not being like a scientist.
Anyways, yeah. So can you give me one proof of NASA saying?
Oh my God, I already debunked that. Anybody else questions God, philosophy, morality? Any non-stupid questions? Hmm.
Hey, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yeah, so I'm curious. I wanted to poke you with a stick a little bit about morality, objective, subjective. Like roughly familiar with your perspective, but I've been kind of like, I don't know, nibbling around it a little bit. Would you mind just like quickly just running through like your kind of like rough view on like the because I believe that you have like a you believe it's objective, but it's not based on like some kind of like external like supernatural being or deity. It's like more based on like rooted or like I believe you use like moral progress largely is like evidence pointing towards that.
More progress is one of the phenomenon that is used. So objective morality is a hypothesis. There isn't any hard evidence for it yet, and the basis of that hypothesis is to explain moral progress and moral intuition, and the patterns in moral progress and moral intuition seem to indicate a clear pattern, and that pattern can be described with the principle any involuntary position of will is immoral. And that's the basis of morality. And I think it's just a part of physics, just like everything is a part of physics, no extra supernatural anything.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. I feel like it's something that I like. I broadly agree with you on that. Like, it makes sense, but there's like points of friction that like I keep kind of like bumping into with it because in my mind, like I agree with like I guess how do I want to say this? I want to articulate it clearly. Um, the idea of imposition of will. Um, let me try another because I was having this really interesting conversation with somebody the other day, and they were kind of like, their thought was that it makes sense for us to like it would make sense for us to develop these like moral intuitions, or like given that like there is no like external objective kind of like sky daddy that's like giving us rules. You can see how like you know even if we do have our own kind of like subjective views of like what is right and wrong, or even if we have kind of like cultural or like influences that kind of like push us in like slightly different directions or like guide us towards different things, you can see how like evolutionarily like the moral intuitions that we've arrived at or that we seem to like broadly and roughly share are kind of like helpful in maintaining like an productive and cooperative society. Um, but I don't like. I guess I'm trying to like the imposition of will thing. It feels a little bit strange to me because like um the it depends, I guess, on how you like really clearly define that. Like, because I can come up with like any number of like hypothetical situations where like because in my mind, sorry, I feel like I'm rambling a little bit, but I like to say that like there's no like there's no objective morality, but there's like morality within an objective. Like in order to make any kind of ought statement, you have to be framing it within some kind of like goal or like with reference to some kind of like desired outcome. Um, and like given that being the case, like I guess I can think of like any number of hypothetical situations where like somebody like you could impose your will on somebody or like imposing your will could like ultimately end up like in like a utilitarian sense, like resulting in like a more positive or beneficial outcome. And I guess it's like my question is, do you feel like there has to be any kind of like ultimate consequence or like goal? Like is there any like articulated goal beyond like everybody just having the ability to like express their own desire? Like is that the ultimate framework?
I think your question is in regards to like our pragmatic reality, the one we live in, as opposed to a perfectly moral world. And those are two very different things. So we don't live in a perfectly moral world. And so there are times when imposing on somebody's will can prevent greater imposition of will, like putting a murderer in prison so they don't murder anymore is going to be an imposition on his will, but to prevent him imposing on other wills or whatever. And in a perfectly moral world, that would be bad because in a perfectly moral world, there would be no involuntary imposition of will. So if we're talking about objective morality, it's not going to be contingent on what's best for this subjective world that we live in now. It's what would be best in any and all possible situations. And so that would be like a world where it was physically impossible to force anyone to do anything they didn't consent to doing. No aging, no death, no disease, unless you consented to it. Everybody gets their own universe, and you can do whatever you want with it, essentially. In that world, what is morality? What would be the principles of morality? And it would be no involuntary imposition of will. And then if you take that morality that's applied to the best of all possible worlds and try to apply it in this world, there are many cases where we have to impose on our wills, impose on other people's wills without their consent, like making people eat their vegetables or stop lights or sending people to prison, pay your taxes, that have pragmatic benefits in this world, but that isn't representative of what objective morality is or what morality is. That's just objective. That's just representative of what is most useful in this subjective world that we
Right,
live.
within it, yeah, within this, yeah, orienting yourself like towards a desired like outcome or goal. That makes sense. So in terms of like, because I get your point, and that like makes that maps on because like obviously we don't live in like the perfect perfect world. So then in that case, given that we don't, and given like you said that there are like any number of situations where like to get to a desired outcome, there's going to involve some implementing or like exerting will over another individual. How do you like what do you like what how do you deal with like conflicting like how do you not like what in the like in an applied like ethical sense like what does it mean like from your perspective like sure you can like articulate or you can understand like what things would be like in a perfect in the perfect world, but does that really help us in this like in this non like this imperfect functional one? Like what should we like take from that to try and kind of like minimize the I guess like the incorrect or like maladaptive exertion of will over others? Because in my mind it's like I can understand those two things and I can see like the difference and like but there seems to be this like gap of like what do you do when people run into friction? Like, does it really give you any kind of like answers or cue you into like what might be the optimal way to navigate this imperfect world?
Sure. So yeah, we can use the idealized description of morality that would apply to the best of all possible worlds, and then comparing it to where we are now, say, what can we do to get as close as possible to the best of all possible worlds from where we are now? And so then we can say, well, if we don't put the prisoner in prison, he's going to kill people, and the people's death is going to be a greater imposition than putting him in prison. Therefore, it's less immoral to put him in prison. So we can say, oh, even though it is immoral to put him in prison because it's an involuntary imposition of will, there will be less overall immorality than letting him roam free and kill people. And so we can compare the imposition of will of any given action and see which one has the least, and then apply that to bring us closer to the best of all possible worlds. And we can also give insight into things like legalization of weed or whatever. Legalization of weed, if people want to take weed and that's their will, then imposing on that is immoral. And as long as it doesn't cause any harm, like if it was going to kill them like arsenic or something, then clearly we should make it illegal. But if it doesn't cause any harm, then we should make it legal because it's an involuntary
Well,
imposition of will to stop them from being able to take weed.
So you
so
said a couple of times, you said you know, the murderer, like murdering somebody would be like a greater imposition of will. How are you how are you determining like greater or like lesser? Like how do you how do you like determine like the value or like the extremity? Because I can imagine a number of like hypotheticals where um that would be number one. I would feel like that would have to be something that would like subjectively, depending on the individual, like, you know, to me, the you know, exerting will over me, even if it's like a relatively minor thing, might be something that like you know, because it's my personal subjective well-being, and like, okay, I can get out of the subjective thing. But yeah, how do you evaluate or how do you like weight the different impositions? Is it just based on like you know, maximizing well-being and reducing suffering or harm?
No. So well-being is not really a well-defined term in philosophy. It's not really a term in
Yeah.
philosophy, but the way I define it is essentially we use induction to infer based on our own abilities that all humans have roughly the same level of feeling, essentially. And so we give pretty much all humans the same weight emotionally. And so if you're killing one person, that's no different than killing another person. So we don't weight people differently normally when we're trying to assess if you're imposing on one person's will, is it less important than another? And so we just say that if you kill a person of any kind, then that isn't equally bad as killing another person of another kind. And so the imposition of will is usually measured just by you're a person, so you have some set moral value which is applied to all people and is equal among all people. And so killing all of them is any of them is equally as bad.
Yeah, no, I can see that in terms of like measure like killing one person versus another, but like in the situation of like putting the murderer in prison versus like potentially letting them murder somebody else. Number one, in that specific example, like you can make the argument that like there's like a greater likelihood that they would murder again, or that they're like, but like if it's in that sense, it would be like kind of preemptive. Like they haven't actually like, okay, so they've done the one murder, I guess, but then that would have to be some kind of like punitive or uh, like you get into like justice. But like I guess I'm trying to suss out like what makes what makes putting somebody in prison for the rest of their life um more or less of an imposition than murdering someone. I mean, I guess I'm like that's like a very kind of like simplistic example because it's like, you know, you're taking somebody's life away versus like, you know, just kind of limiting somebody's like ability to kind of interact with society in general, but in like more kind of like more narrow circumstances, right? Or like if you're getting down into things that would be kind of like more or I guess like less extreme. Like how do you kind of like evaluate the severity or like the, I guess that's kind of still what I'm like bumping into mentally.
Well, I'd say that mostly like legal laws do a pretty good job of that when you're like doing impositions on harm and whatever and breaking someone's leg or assault or battery or whatever. We do seem to have a pretty good basis on how much harm those actions cause to an individual and can quantify that relatively well. So I don't see much challenge there.
Hmm. Yeah, and again, it's like it's I think it's easier to kind of like it's easier to weight things like that when you are talking about like breaking a leg versus cutting off an arm versus like killing someone, because those are kind of like, we can understand kind of intuitively from subjective experience the ways that those are kind of like cause like greater amounts of like physical pain or discomfort or like bodily harm, kind of like broadly. But in terms of things like I guess in a more practical, like legal sense, or like in a policy sense, we talk about things like wearing seatbelts, or potentially like, I can think of any number of things where it's like, it would be tougher for me to kind of like determine, if it's more of an imposition to like force people to wear seatbelts, or like, I guess what would be like another example, like or like restrict, who can drive, because like, you get data that says that, people within a specific like cohort like tend to get into accidents at such a rate that it's like probably better overall if we just like don't let them drive, like maybe like people over 80 who have dementia or something like that. It's like I guess like in my mind I can come up with things that like wouldn't be as easy to kind of like weight or value. Like, do you think it would be fair in that sense to kind of like turn to or like appeal to moral intuition, or like I guess like an average of moral intuition, if you're looking in kind of like a democratic sense, like if you're going to be in a society and you're going to like kind of like in a I guess in like a social contract kind of idea, like those things can be determined, or like you can value or weight those things based on how the society that you exist in kind of like broadly like agrees to like value or weight them. Like, do you think that would make sense?
Well, in the case of like wearing seatbelts, that's a pragmatic limitation based on how much damage is caused by not wearing seatbelts. And so that's not really based on morality at all. That's based on, if we don't do this action, how much damage is caused based on the lives of lost of people not wearing seatbelts. And so it's not, that one wouldn't be based on morality. That would be based on just the pragmatic limitations of our society. But if you're asking like, how do we weight like one imposition over another in some mundane context, like, I don't know, paying taxes or something? I think all of them are going to kind of boil down to what's pragmatically best in your society for
Yeah,
promoting life or whatever. Like, if there's just arbitrary things
it
that
would
you
make
make people do
sense.
for no reason, like you must pray 5 times a day, like that's just stupid and immoral and it shouldn't happen. Like, you shouldn't have those kinds of restrictions.
Yeah, I can totally, that kind of that maps on pretty neatly. Like, I don't really feel that that makes intuitive sense to me. Um, the only other thing that I was kind of like thinking about with regards to this is like, if there is some I was thinking about the idea that like for some, in some situations or in some cases, and I'm like, I haven't thought of like a very like perfect example, but I'm thinking of the idea that like some people will feel um will experience an imposition of will, kind of like, quote unquote, as more or less uh, extreme, I guess, or as more or less like impactful on them, depending on like uh, the ability or like the understand, like the depth of understanding that they have about like how their will is being like limited, or like the restrictions that are being placed on them. I'm kind of thinking like, if you don't know that you have, like if you don't know that you're being um kind of like influence, if you don't know that you're like that you don't have access to something, or like you don't know that like you're being restricted in some way, you're not going to feel as strongly about it if you are made aware of it. And I'm wondering, like, do you think that there could be a case where it would be I guess where it makes sense to kind of like, I don't want to phrase this. I guess because it does. It sounds so like, I guess, fashy, but like that's not really. It's not even that really. It's like, does it make sense to kind of like limit people's access or like their information about the extent to which their freedom or their will is being like imposed upon in such a way, because it reduces overall like their like internal friction or their like subjective experience um of like that imposition. I mean, I'm doing a poor job of articulating it, but I'm just kind of like throwing some spaghetti at the wall.
I would say that if you are deliberately limiting the information people have and they would presumably want that information, that would in itself be immoral because you're restricting their will, that they want some particular information or would want some particular information and you're not giving it to them. That would be immoral. in if it's relevant to their lives, and it would be moral to, of course, if they want some information, to give them the information. So
Right.
if
But I'm thinking even in the sense that like if you knew like in a hypothetical where you knew for like with certainty that like making them aware of the imposition was going to cause them like more discomfort or like unease or anxiety or suffering, like that was going to have more of a negative effect or impact on their subjective experience versus them not knowing about it. They would just kind of like, ignorance is bliss kind of a thing. If you knew in that hypothetical like with absolute certainty, like would that like do you think that would ever be the case? Because if you're saying like, oh, it's wrong to restrict people's that's something they would want to know, but it's like, would they want to know it if it was going to cause them more harm? That seems like an assumption that I would bump into. I don't know about that for sure.
Well, yeah, those are definitely cases that could happen, but I would just ask them. I'd say, okay, so there is this fact you don't know. It could potentially cause you more harm if you know it. Do you want to know it? And I'd let them decide for themselves.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, okay, that makes sense. Yeah, I could see that. Yeah, cool. No, I like I said, I definitely kind of like broadly agree with your points, and I've been kind of like kicking these things around because I run into the most bizarre pushbacks, and people have some like really strange just I don't know, Discord's a weird and wonderful place. Like this one guy I was talking to you about this, like pretty much these exact same things the other day. He insisted that like he was describing things like almost exactly the way that I was, but he was insisting that like I think the exact quote was like, just because we have slightly different concepts of what is moral doesn't mean it's not like doesn't make it subjective. And so he's using like subjective and objective in just like the strangest ways. And it took like a good like 2 hours of kind of like semantic unpacking to really kind of like loop around and like understand what he was really saying. It was so strange. Like somebody's calling left right and right left. It like got me all twisted around for a little bit. But yeah, no. Thanks for your time. I might pop back in at a later date and kind of like poke you a little bit more. So
Sure,
yeah,
absolutely.
thanks. I appreciate it.
Thanks for coming up. Anybody else have any questions, comments, stuff? Philosophy, morality, epistemology, God.
Well, I guess I would have a question. So,
Sure.
so you would consider, and correct me if I'm wrong. So you would consider the involuntary imposition of will to be like wrong
Immoral.
or immoral.
Yep.
Yeah. So would that classify, or would that statement be classified as a sort of a normative statement?
Yes, I'm a moral realist. Well, it's sort of normative.
Well, in the context of that normative claim, how can we, if morality indeed is objective, as you would claim, how could we sort of objectively or verify the objectiveness of those normative statements, such as the voluntary imposition of will is immoral? I guess that would be my question.
Make novel testable predictions that if this statement accurately corresponds to the nature of reality, we would expect to see X or Y or something, and then confirm those predictions to see if they are correct.
Well, yes. What would be classified as like the true? Like, could you kind of repeat what you said or explain it a bit further? I'm kind of.
Sorry, you'd say that if your hypothetical view of morality is correct, like mine, and if it's like my prediction is that if my morality is correct, it's something that permeates the universe and affects all conscious agents, and so all conscious agents would have the same pattern of moral progress anywhere in the universe that we look. And so if you wanted to make like an alternative, you could say I have an alternative version of morality, but the same basic consequence that it affects all agents. And so we'd say that if we go to planet X and see their moral progress, they're going to be following your principle instead of mine or something.
Yeah, but I guess there wouldn't be any. There even wouldn't be any like moral propositions without like the subjects even existing within reality. So how can we say that like morality is objective? It is if it is contingent upon like the value judgment of subjective minds.
That's only the